Okay, everyone. So we're going to do a sample tutorial here today about how to do the gesture recognition lab using the sample converter processing sketch that I created in conjunction with the Weka machine learning software. So to get started, this does assume that you've got the Weka software downloaded as well as processing. We're using processing 3.3.6, but this should work on most platforms, and the sample converter software downloaded and opened. So to get started, we're going to look over here at the configuration file, and there are a couple of things that we're going to need to change here in order to get started. The first thing is we're going to type in our name to start recording it and saving it as ourselves. I'm going to change this over to ZC data. The real important thing here for your file name is one, that you remember it, and two, that it ends in this .arff file extension. This is the software file extension for Weka, and so it's got to be in that if it's going to be able to recognize it. You can see here for our file title, we have it called accelerometer gestures. This is because we're going to be capturing gesture with the accelerometer today. And then here for gestures, this is a list of gestures that we would like to capture. So for today, we're just going to be capturing two gestures. I'm going to be capturing texting and nothing. So just trying to distinguish between those two things. Now, when you do this for real, you are going to be capturing quite a bit more. And so you'll need to kind of extend this list out. The important thing is that your gestures are in double quotations separated by a comma. So that's important so it can tell the difference between all of them. We're not going to be using sample data, so this is kind of just for simple testing purposes, but we're going to be using live data, so this should be set to false. And then here you can see the port number is set to 0. Now, we're not 100% sure on what port number we're going to be using, so we're going to set this at 0, but I'll show you guys how to actually configure this as well to see kind of what port number your Bluetooth band is communicating on. So at this point, we are good to hit play. Now, when we hit play, it's going to pop up a window over here. But more importantly, down here, we can see that it actually prints out a list of our serial ports. This Bluetooth incoming port is not our live port. That's not what's actually connected to our Bluetooth band, but rather this HC05 DEV-B. And we can see that that's connected on port 1. Your computer may be different just depending on how it's configured, but on mine, it's going to be port 1. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to hit play again. Now, sometimes it does occur that it can't connect for some reason. Maybe you get a number format. That's okay. Sometimes that happens on the first time you run it. If that occurs to you, then just hit stop and play again, and it should start showing up. Okay, so once we're in this window, we'll see that we have some various controls. To start recording a gesture, we're going to hit R. We'll come back to that a little bit. To change our gestures, so we're going to be recording multiple gestures here, you can hit the up arrow. To close the program, you hit Q, and that's going to be a really important one. That's going to save out the file that we're creating. You wouldn't want to hit the X button or the stop button here. When you're ready to close everything down, you do want to hit Q. Evaluate gesture is going to be for a little bit later on. That's when we're going to be feeding it live data and trying to determine what it was. And so you can see here kind of in our status window that our current gesture is texting. If I hit the up arrow, you can see that changes to nothing. And if you had more gestures, this would just cycle through the list. Recording is false because we're not recording right now. And samples remaining is 100. And what this means is that when you hit record, this is going to count down from 100, and you need to continue doing that gesture until it reaches 0. And then lastly, you can see evaluate false again. That's when we're in evaluation mode, which we're not doing just yet. But to kind of get a visualization as to what this data looks like, go ahead and hit the space bar. And when you do that, you're going to see your X, Y, and Z values pop up. And so these are just graphing the data that's coming from the band. And right now it looks very flat because I'm not doing anything. But if I were to pick up my phone and start texting, you should be able to see that that data looks a little bit differently. And that seems to make sense because the way that our body is moving is going to be different when we're texting versus when we're just sitting still. Okay. Now, the trick here is that it's not always as really obvious what the difference between those gestures are, at least visually as we look at the graph. And so that's where our machine learning software, Weka, is going to come into handy because it's going to help us sort those things out as well as help us determine algorithmically how to determine the difference between gestures when we're not sitting there and looking at the data. And so with everything in mind, we're going to start off by actually recording some nothing gestures. So you can see I've got my hand kind of on the table relatively still, and I'm going to hit R, okay, and you'll see that the samples remaining counts down, and that is one recorded gesture. So we want to do 5 of each of these just for samples. For the actual exercise, you'll probably be doing more, but we're going to do 5 of these. So that was 1. Okay, here's number 2. Here's number 3 and 4 and 5. Okay, so that's 5 recorded samples of nothing. So now I'm going to change that current gesture by hitting the up arrow to texting, and I want to do 5 of these. So I'm going to grab my phone, and I'm going to start texting, and I'm going to record. Texting, texting, texting. Okay, and let's go again. Okay, so that was 2. Here's 3 and 4 and 5. Okay, so now that I have my 5 kind of examples of each of these, now what I can do is I can go in and I can begin kind of doing the analyzation. So right now I'm done, so I'm going to go ahead and hit that Q for quit program. That's going to shut things down. And like I said, that's going to create a file on our computer that we can then feed into Weka. To get to that file, we're going to go up to Sketch and Show Sketch Folder. And in there, you're going to see that file that you wrote. So this is that zcdata.arff. Yours may be titled differently if you named it differently, and that's okay. And so that's what we're going to feed into Weka. So we're going to come over here to Weka, and we're going to click on Explorer. And we're going to open a file. And mine is located on the desktop under Sample Converter and ZC Data. So yours may be in a slightly different space. Just kind of keep track of where it's at and navigate to it. And we're going to click Open. And you're going to see some data load up in here. That all looks very nice. Let's click over on this Classify tab. And what we want to do is we want to choose a different classifier. So we'll click on Choose. And what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down and we're going to go to Trees. And we're going to choose the J48 tree. This is a algorithm that's going to analyze the software statistically. It's going to try to find very unique features of each gesture and kind of show those to us. So once you have that selected, go ahead and click on Start. And what you'll see down here is you will see that we have a confusion matrix here. And what happened here is that it looks like of our texting gestures, it accidentally classified one of them incorrectly. You can see that we have a 90% correctly classified instances and a 10% of incorrectly. And so as you do more gestures, as you do more samples, this should get better and better, but there will be times when maybe something looks really close, it looks really close, and it's not going to be able to distinguish between those two. And that's just part of machine learning. The way that you would adjust for that would be to possibly go back and to retrain it, try a different approach. But with that, I think that's going to be pretty good for us today. So we're going to go ahead and look at our decision tree. So we'll want to kind of keep track of that confusion matrix. You'll want to record that. But what's going to help us right now is our decision tree. And so if we visualize our tree, you will notice that here it says X mean window. And it says that if that's greater or equal to 395, then it's probably texting. I'm sorry, if it's less than or equal to 395, it's probably texting. If it's greater than 395, then it's probably nothing. And so we do want to be able to use this for our next step, which is going to be training the sample converter software to be able to tell the difference between these two things. So if we come over here to sample converter, again, you're going to want to save that for your documentation. But if we come over and if we go to let me find it for a second. Let's have a look-see. That's for that. No. Oh, that's why I couldn't see it. Okay. So you can see where there's going to be a file, and this probably will be gone at some point, that we have a custom evaluation. Okay, so to do this, we're going to be kind of putting in our own information here. And so to do this, we're going to kind of need to use this data here and essentially turn that into something that we can turn into a bunch of if-else statements here. Now in this case, because our gestures were pretty straightforward, it's going to make this process pretty simple. In terms of the different things that we're evaluating, we're looking at a lot of sample evaluation, and so when we get an evaluation, we're going to be looking at certain what are called windows. Now in this case, you'll see how it says x mean window 0. And so what that means is that our different stats here, we can look at the x mean, the standard deviation, the y mean, the y standard deviation, the z mean or the z standard deviation, and we can look at a specific slice of that data, and that's what's called a window. Now in this case, and I'm going to kind of get rid of this here, is we are going to look at a custom evaluation. So this is kind of our sample one down here. So we're going to kind of block that out. And we're going to say if the eval stats, and here we want to tell it kind of which stat to look at and then which window to look at. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, which stat do we want to see? Now this says look at the x mean. So we know that x mean is recorded as 0. So I'm going to put a 0 here. Okay. And then the next thing we need to do is look at the window. And this is also window 0. Okay. And so if that is less than or equal to 395, okay, then we want it to return a certain value. In this case, we're going to say eval guess equals texting. Okay. If it's not that, then our eval guess equals nothing. Okay. And so with that in mind, that's going to essentially walk us through. Now it could be that this tree could get more complex as we add more gestures. If that was the case, then our if-else statements may get a little bit more elaborative, and that's okay. We would just kind of step through this and do an if-else for each unique condition that exists. And that's how we're going to step down this tree of evaluation. Okay. So now that we have this kind of in place, we can save this, and we're going to go back over and we're going to hit play again. Okay. And again, we're going to kind of wait for this to come on, and it may start connecting immediately. So it looks like that one didn't connect right away. So I'm going to try it again. Okay, looks like it may just be taking a second to connect, but hopefully not too much longer. Ooh, all right. Third time's a charm. Okay, here we go. And I'm just going to hit that space bar. Okay, so we know that we're getting good data because that's coming across. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we want to evaluate the gesture. We've programmed it to recognize a gesture, and so we're going to actually test that. So I'm going to hit E, and you'll see that that evaluate turns to true. And right now, you know, gesture is not saying anything because we haven't given it a gesture yet. Okay, to start evaluating a gesture, we're going to hit that R to record, and it's going to record those values that are coming in. Then it's going to take a best guess on what we are doing. So we're going to do nothing, and we're going to see if it will return nothing. So here we go. We're going to hit record. It records those 100 samples, and true, it returns back nothing. Okay, so now I'm going to go into my texting mode. I'm going to hit record again. Okay, we're text, and you can see that it has come back texting. So this proves to us that our algorithm is good. Now your goal is going to be to try to show this over the course of many, many gestures. So this is just a very simple explanation of how to step through the software. Again, where it's going to get more complicated is when you start adding more gestures. The statistic that you're evaluating, the window that you're evaluating, these are all going to start to change. And so you just have to pay attention to the values that it's giving you to be able to make those determinations. So hopefully that is a nice intro. There's going to be lots of good challenges associated with this, but hopefully this was enough to get you started. And that's it.